It's me, Sam, back again with A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Chapter 2, The Spirit of Christmas Past. Again, I apologise if you can hear that noise. It is my computer's fan going on. If you can't hear it, that's great. That is great. But I worry that you might be able to hear it. Anyway, let's continue. Part 2. When Scrooge was awoken, it was dark in his room, and he couldn't tell the difference between the solid wall and the transparent window. No matter how much he narrowed his ferrety little eyes to try and focus. The clock had just struck the 3/4, so he waited to find out what the hour was. In bed, Scrooge lay. He thought and thought, over and over in his mind, about what had happened the previous evening, trying to make sense of it all. But the more he thought, the more confused he became, until he decided that he probably shouldn't bother thinking about it. Well, we all know how that goes. You can't stop thinking about something any more than you can stop the breeze on a sunless day. Was it a dream or not? His mind kept asking him. And no matter how much he tried to ignore the question and sleep, the louder it got. Then he remembered Marley had warned him of a visit of 3 spirits, the first to come at 1. He waited with more anticipation for the tolling of the hour by the church clock. Laying there, he surrounded by his closed bed curtains, he waited. Suddenly, the clock struck 1. Scrooge sat up suddenly. His long pointy nose almost touched the bed curtain. Suddenly it was parted by a hand, and Scrooge found himself face to face with an unearthly visitor Jacob had warned him about. It was a strange, odd little creature. At first it appeared to be an old codger, as old as himself. But on closer inspection, Scrooge thought it was more childlike and possibly female. Then again, maybe it was an old man who was of diminished size. It had long white hair that flowed over its shoulders and down its back. Its arms and legs and feet and hands were all bare. His limbs were very long and muscular, and gave the impression of huge strength, despite the diminished size. It wore a simple white tunic, and held in its hand a sprig of holly. In contrast, his white tunic was edged, hemmed with summer flowers. Most extraordinary of all was this great extinguisher it held under its arm, which he assumed was its cap. Its sparkling, lustrous belt shined, and its body came in and out of focus, as its body seemed to flicker in the huge light that shone out on the top of its head. Imagine the Tin Man's hat, but bigger, and not a funnel. It's blocked off. That's a candle snuffer. They're usually on long sticks, and you can, come along and you put the top over the candle, and it suffocates it of oxygen, and the flame goes out. That's what this fellow was, woman, fellow, child, was carrying under its arm. But I digress. Like a typical old codger, he asked, "Are you the spirit that Jacob told me of?" As if it were likely to be another spirit passing by, that it decided to pop in unannounced. Really, Darwin. Not Darwin. Charles. Not Charles Darwin. Charles Dickens. "I am," said this voice, soft and kind, low as if it were some distance away and not right in his face. "Who and what are you?" "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" asked Scrooge. "No, your past," it replied. For some unknown reason, Scrooge had a sudden urge to see the spirit with his hat on, and asked it to cap itself. "What?" said the spirit, as though it were Oprah Winfrey interviewing Meghan Markle. "What?" Sorry, I just had to throw that in there, because that's quite funny. And it's probably exactly how the spirit sounded. "Why should you so soon put out the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those who made me make this cap and force me to carry it through the years and wear it low over my eyebrows?" Scrooge vehemently denied ever having made anything for the spirit, nor having ever forced the spirit to wear the cap at any point in his life up to that moment. When asked, as bravely as he was able, he then asked, as bravely as he was able, "What business brought you here, spirit?" "Your welfare," explained the ghost. Again, being as polite as possible, as the spirit was a stranger to him, and this was the 1800s, he expressed his gratitude. "I'm much obliged," he said, "but I feel a solid night's sleep might serve me better." "Your redemption, then," said the spirit, and took Scrooge by the arm gently, grasping it, though, in such a way that Scrooge felt it useless to try and escape the grip. "Rise and walk with me," implored the spirit. Scrooge rose and followed. But when he saw they were headed to the window, not the door, he said, "Crikey!" I added that bit. "Be careful. I'll fall. I'm mortal. I'll die. I'm not a spirit." "Just a touch of my soul here," said the spirit, indicating its heart, "and you will be upheld and safe." Instead of passing through the open window, as Scrooge thought they would, the spirit led them through the wall next to the window. And Scrooge found himself on an open country road, with fields on either side of it, covered with snow. As a small group came along the road, far off in the distance, it was coming closer and closer. "Well, I be," he said. "I was raised here," said Scrooge. His lip trembled, and a tear had dropped from his eye onto his cheek. "What's that on your cheek, and why do your lips tremble?" taunted the spirit, for he knew all too well that it was what it was and the reason for the wobbly lips. Scrooge replied, "It's a pimple," either with sarcasm or shame. "Do you know the way?" asked the spirit. Scrooge nodded and said he could walk it blindfolded. Strange, then, to not have given it a second's thought till now. Their attention was soon drawn again to the oncoming group. Scrooge became very excited all of a sudden as he recognised them. There were boys on horseback and some in farmers' carts, and Scrooge shouted out to them one by one, all by name. The Spirit thought it pertinent to explain. These are shadows of things that have been. We cannot be seen nor heard. Scrooge's eyes continued to glisten, and his heart leapt with joy as they passed him, though he could not understand why, or explain why hearing them say Merry Christmas to each other as they parted at the crossroads for their various homes brought him glee. School is not empty, is it? The Spirit inquired knowingly. A single child, ignored by his friends and neglected by family, sits there still. Scrooge nodded and sobbed. Soon they arrived at a red brick mansion, which had seen better days and threatened to fall down about them. Along the entire way to the building, Scrooge was regaling the Spirit with joyous shouts of, I know that field, I did this in that field, or I recognise that bench. Together they entered the great hall. They crossed it and entered through a door at the rear of the hall, which was filled with benches and desks, all in rows. At one desk sat a lone boy, reading near a feeble fire. Wonder if that's where he got the idea of feeble fires from. Anyway, Scrooge wept as he sat next to the younger self to see what a poor, forgotten, wretched creature he was once. The Spirit touched his arm gently to draw his attention to a group of younger Scrooge's friends approaching. Bloody hell, shouted Scrooge. I'm allowed to say that, YouTube. It was in Harry Potter, and if it's in Harry Potter, I can say it here. It's a very, very, very British thing to say. Bloody hell, shouted Scrooge in astonishment. It's Ali Baba. I remember he did come to see me one Christmas. And look, Valentine and Orson. And the parrot. Oh, poor Robin Crusoe. And Friday. Of course, they are not there. They're only there in your child's eye. Not real at all. We see them because you saw them as a child. No, nothing more. No, for no other reason. Scrooge undoubtedly knew this, and unlike his usual bitter, crotchety old self, again wept for the boy he once was before saying, I wish... And Scrooge muttered something, which the Spirit had heard, but would rather Scrooge say it louder and own it. So he asked, What? I don't think he asked that like Oprah Winfrey. Nothing, he said, lying, and then continued, I just wish... There was a boy last night in front of my offices singing a carol. I wish now that I had given him something, that's all. The Spirit smiled. Let's see another Christmas. It was now years later, and the younger Scrooge had become an older Scrooge, but still was a young Scrooge. Hope you follow that. The panels of the room were more shrunken, its plaster was more dilapidated and falling down. There were cracked windows, and it was dirtier and darker. The young man was not reading this time, but pacing the room. As usual, all the other boys had gone home for the holidays and left Scrooge alone without a thought. Scrooge was not watching himself. He was watching the closed door. Clearly he was aware of what was about to happen. And right on cue, it opened, and a small girl entered, rushed to Scrooge, the younger, not the older, put her arms about his neck, and kissed him gently and sisterly, and said with glee, "Oh, brother, dear, dear, sweet brother, I have come to bring you home. Home!" Scrooge watched himself reply with disbelief. "Home, Fran?" "Yes, yes, home, and for good. You are coming home, never to return here. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, Ebby, that one night, as I was going to bed, I was not scared to ask him once more if you could please come home. And he said yes, and he sent me to come and get you. Oh, and you are to be a man. But not until we have a jolly Christmas together. You are to be a man." This is merely an indication that his father has got him a job or position, apprenticeship of some kind. I'm more curious, and it's never really mentioned or addressed in any of the adaptions that I've ever seen. And yes, I am going off on a bit of a tangent because I think this is an important part of the story that is ignored and never really addressed or spoken about. His sister says, "Father is so much kinder than he used to be. I was not scared to ask him once more." How terrifying was this man? Was he cruel? Did he beat Ebenezer as a child before he went off to boarding school? I mean, we'll never know because Dickens is dead and can't explain that part of the story. But this is one of those paragraphs that really gives me some sympathy for Scrooge. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for the man in much of the story, as many of us do not. But think about that. In this day and age, if a child had been neglected and abused by his father and sent away, the authorities might have stepped in. Anyway, I digress. Ebby, as his sister called him, hugged Fran with all his might, and together they laughed as in the distance they heard the schoolmaster call for Master Ebenezer's trunk to be packed and brought down immediately. Neither young Scrooge nor Fran cared much for the schoolmaster, but young Ebby did as was custom, shook his hand and thanked him for his imprisonment. They took tea with him and had stale cake, whilst his trunk was packed and placed on the coach and secured for their journey home. The spirit now turned to Scrooge and said, "She was always a delicate creature, but she had a heart of gold." Scrooge nodded. "I'll not deny it. She was a fair dinkum, true blue Sheila. If if ever there was one. She died a woman, said the spirit, but had children, I believe. The ghost knew full well she had just one child. Only one, said Scrooge. True, your nephew Fred. See, she knew his name. Yes, replied Scrooge with an uneasiness building inside him. No longer in a country manor house, Scrooge found he and the spirit were now at another familiar place. I know this place, he said. It's old Fezziwig's. I was an apprentice here. Did you see that? I was attacked brutally in my own home by a mosquito-y netty thing trying to go up my nose. He gasped. Just sitting here trying to read a story, I don't know. Sorry, let's go on. Well, damn, my nose is all itchy. Now you made me lose my spot wherever you are. The spirit led them inside where they watched as Mr. Fezziwig ordered 2 young men to stop work and ready the place for the party. Though one was much older than the Scrooge of the last vision, he was clearly the same man-child. And he did as he was asked. Together, he and the other apprentice boarded up the windows with shutters, cleared away all work desks and benches, and made room for tables of food. That's Dick Wilkins, explained Scrooge to the spirit without being asked to. He was very close to me, he was. He looked up to me, he did. As with most things, Scrooge, I often wonder, did he really, or was that just Scrooge's interpretation? We shall never know. As they watched on, the 2 young men transformed the work office into a bright, warm, and cheerful ballroom, party ready on a winter's night. At that moment, in poured a stream of family and guests. First came Mrs. Fezziwig, followed by her 3 daughters, all dressed in their finery. Following them came no less than 6 suitors, all of whom had had their hearts broken by the 3 girls. Then came all the men and all the women that worked in the warehouse, then those who worked at the house. The maid came with her cousin, the baker, the cook and her brother's friend, who happened to be the milkman. They all came one after another, some boldly, some more shyly, some gracefully, and some just outright pushed their way through. Shortly the party began, and they danced to the fiddler's music, and when he rested they played games. Forfeits. My best recollection or explanation of forfeits is a game where any game in which you forfeit your participation by giving a wrong answer, not getting a seat like in musical chairs, those sorts of games where people are knocked out one by one. That's probably the best way I can explain forfeits. Okay. Then they had more dancing. Finally there came a huge roast, a cold boiled ham, mince pies, and beer. They drank a lot of beer in that era. Beer was actually drunk instead of water, and so as I know I'm boring you with history, just learn. I'm a bit of a history person. I love history. But beer was drunk because it was cleaner than the water. Imagine, no sanitation, no clear water, no, they have water pumps in the streets, but no turn-onable, offable water in the homes at this point. So beer was made because of the process that creates beer. It kills all bacteria, and thus it is, if it's made right. So not all beer is necessarily bacteria-free, but yeah. And that's why they drank beer in abundance, because it was cleaner than water. It's also why they drank gin, which will become relevant in the next chapter. Again, because of the process of making the gin, it was, it like almost purified the water in a way. Gin was actually less expensive than beer. Not exactly sure why. I think it's just down to the process and the ingredients. But yeah, gin was in more abundant. So to be offering beer at a party, Fezziwig was really putting on quite a show. I digress. They ate until they had their fill, and the fiddler was rested enough to play once more on his fiddle to the crowded room. Before too long, the clock struck 11, and the ball broke up, and Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their places on either side of the door. And that word doesn't exist, Sam. What did you write? To give their guests a Merry Christmas. Sometimes with a handshake, sometimes with a hug, and sometimes with a hug and a peck on the cheek, depending on the closeness of them to the person. Lastly came the two apprentices, the only remaining guests, for they lived on the premises. They were left to their beds, finally, which were pushed out of the way and stored under a counter in the back shop. During the whole party, Scrooge did not miss an opportunity to dance or laugh, older Scrooge, or tell the spirit everything he knew about everybody there. However, now it was all quiet, and the ghost's gaze hadn't left Scrooge the entire night, and he beckoned to him to say, "Such a small, insignificant thing, really, that makes these folk so full of gratitude." His words, that he had chosen very well, had the right effect on Scrooge, older Scrooge, and he replied indignantly, "Small?" The spirit then signalled for him to listen to the apprentices, as they were now in deep conversation. They were both pouring out praise of Mr. Fezziwig and his generosity at supplying such a wonderful time, dance, food, and drinks. "Such praise for a single man, is it not?" said the ghost. "He merely spent a few pounds of your mortal money. Does he deserve such praise?" Scrooge was angered by the comment, and a little surprised that he had to explain such things to the spirit. And so, speaking more like his younger, older self, not his old, current self, he said, "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. To say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to count them all up, what then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost him a fortune." No sooner had Scrooge spoken the words that he understood what he was saying, that he wasn't explaining a thing to the ghost. he was explaining a thing to him. He glanced at the spirit. "What's wrong?" the spirit asked. "Nothing," said Scrooge, "except I should like to have been able to have a word or two with my own clerk just now. That's all. My time grows short." "Quick," said the spirit, and immediately they were in a park. Once again, he was present, his younger self, but older still again. Though much older again than the previous one, he wasn't as old as Scrooge. And he was not alone. He sat beside a fair young girl in a mourning dress, whose eyes were filled with tears as she was speaking. "It doesn't matter to you that another idol has replaced me." "What idol?" said Scrooge. "A golden one," she replied. "This is the way things are in the world," Scrooge was trying to explain to the girl. "There is nothing so hard to endure in this world as poverty. We both know it. Yet everyone seems to condemn those who seek out wealth in order to lessen the pain and suffering that the poverty might bring them." "You fear the world too much, Ebenezer. I have seen all your nobler aspirations fall to the wayside, one by one, until none are left except the master passion, gain. Gain engrosses you, and I have not." "Well, so what then?" he said. "Just because I have grown wiser, I haven't changed towards you, am I?" The woman nodded. "Yes, you are. Our contract is an old one. We committed to one another when we were happy and poor, and content to be so until we were able to improve our situation through hard work and patience. You were a changed man when we met, a different man when you proposed. I was just a boy." "See," she replied, "your own heart knows that you are a different person now. I am the same. My heart is broken, and I am miserable that we are no longer of the same heart and mind. However, I still hold enough fondness for you to release you, so that you might one day be happy with your lot." "Have I sought release?" asked Scrooge. "Not in words, but in a changed nature, in an altered spirit. If we had never met, and you met me today on some occasion, you would not seek me out for marriage, for I come with no dowry, and you now weigh the worth of everything. I don't know if you will ever regret this decision, but part of me hopes that you do, and that you find some pain comes of it, so that you might experience some of the pain that I now feel. I say again, I release you, so that you might dismiss me as an unprofitable dream from which you were glad you awoke." Before Scrooge was able to say another word, the woman had risen to her feet and walked off. On the bench beside him lay the ring he had once placed on her finger in promise of marriage. "Spirit, I don't want to see any more of this. Remove me. Take me home. Why do you delight in torturing me so?" Before he could object further, they were in another scene. It was a smaller room, but filled with comfort, warmth, and children, and joy. Sitting by the fire was a woman he did not recognize at first, till he saw the young woman sitting with her. It was clearly the daughter of the woman whose love he had rejected, the woman who he had not recognized him instantly. This young woman was so much like her mother at the same age. It was just as though she was the same woman he'd left in the park by a bench. The room was not just those two, though. It was filled with a horde of children, all making noise as they played, jumped about, and chased one another. The oldest of these was the previously mentioned daughter, sitting now across from her more portly, matronly mother. She was looking from time to time out the window beside where she sat, as if waiting for somebody. It soon became clear they were all waiting for someone. Suddenly she called out, "It's father, he is home." Very soon the children's father and a man, laden with gifts wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, entered the cozy room. The kids went a little bit crazy with their excitement and climbed all over the man bearing the parcels, who clearly had a gift for each child. Once obtaining their gifts and ripping them open, there were lots of shouts of joy and wonder at what was inside. Whew, no, I don't ever edit unless I'm going to sneeze. And I've often said I should really record my sneezes because I don't think you would believe. I'm going to go and rub my noses after sneezing. I don't think you would believe it. It really is the most hilarious sneeze. Anyway, there were shouts of joy and wonder at what was inside their gifts. They were very, very happy and excited. All but the eldest daughter, who remained calm, approached her father and, resting her head on his shoulder, Scrooge could not help but regret his decision of the previous scene. He whispered that he wished he had a daughter as such as the young woman he saw now, doting on him and being there for him in these his later years. The girl's father reached into his pocket and brought out a small box for his daughter, a token, no doubt, that might hang from the ears or the neck. The father then turned and, speaking to his wife, Belle, explained that he had passed by Scrooge's office to find the man still at work. Belle just sighed. There he was, Belle, while his partner lay dying, going over books and counting money, quite alone in the world. If not yet, then very soon. His partner is not expected to survive the night. Scrooge had heard enough. "Remove me now," he demanded. "Haunt me no longer." Then Scrooge took it into his head to grab the extinguisher cap from the spirit and, placing it on top of his head, not Scrooge's head, on top of the head of the spirit, he pushed it down as hard as he could, trying to extinguish the flame. The spirit immediately shrunk in size, and he pushed harder and harder until there was a mere streak of light between the bottom of the snuffer and the floor, spreading out across the floor. Finally, with one last effort, he pushed down. The spirit was gone. He was once again in his dark, dingy, quiet, lonely, old bedroom. Again, he was exhausted and fell into bed and into a deep sleep. that's the end of that one. Tomorrow, Ghost of Christmas Present. And this might be a long one. I really needed to cut this one down. As much as I love the story of A Christmas Carol, I must say, A Christmas Present, the spirit of Christmas Present is really quite laborious. But fear not, for I have made it less laborious, somewhat. Back in a second. Well, tomorrow night I'll see you, but I'll be back in a second. Yeah. See you soon.